It appears that there is 700 years of mystery in our timeline, and we're gonna find out how that is the case. Stick around. And welcome back, everybody. Another Friday, another episode. We got a fantastic topic for you today. We're going to talk about phantom time and how that is the case. So without any further ado, let's get into the presentation. All right, there we go. The presentation right here. And right away, we're in ancient Istanbul, or we're in modern Turkey, however you want. This is the Alay Street in Istanbul. If you look at this picture, you can see a lot of different kind of building styles. So this is a subject that will come back in our episodes time and over again, is that people of the ancients, they used to build on top and on top and on top of ancient structures. And so I had this picture in my archive and it seemed fitting that I'd open up with it. So what we can see is that we have the modern 20th century Turkish Republic style of building on top of what is a 15th century Ottoman wall. So you can see it quite clearly. There's a whole bunch of moss growing in front of it, but there is a Ottoman wall right there. And underneath, we can see a early Byzantine mason arch. And that arch is standing on top of a column. Now, this is typically assumed that it is a Roman column. However, this episode is about finding out if there is actually a Roman city beneath the Byzantine Empire. So, let's figure it out. In order to have this presentation, I leaned heavily on the work of Gunnar Heinsohn. Now, Gunnar Heinsohn, tragically, he died a couple of years ago, so we have to do it with the work that he left us. Luckily, he left us a lot. Now, who is Gunnar Heinsohn? Well, he had a PhD in sociology, and he was studying in social sciences and in historical analysis. And he acquired these studies at the University of Bremen in Germany. And this is also where he became a professor, where he taught these kind of things. So those are his most notable qualifications. However, he also wrote books. And he wrote books that are quite out of the ordinary for the typical kind of professor. Because what most academics try to do is they try to converge into the existing paradigm. And what Professor Heinsohn tried to do is he tried to follow the evidence, and he didn't care if that diverged him from the current paradigm. And then he wrote some books, and these books are quite interesting. So let's have a look at the books. So first of all, he wrote Die Sumerer gab es nicht. It's about the time chronology of the Sumerians and the Akkadians. And basically, the narrative is that all of the timelines that the academics have all put side by side, they all kind of happen simultaneously. And that's a very interesting take on history. I haven't read it myself, but that is one of his books that he published in 1998. He also published this book, Wann lebten die Pharaonen, which is basically in German, When did the Pharaohs live? He wrote it with Herbert Illig, who is also a researcher in time chronology, and I haven't read it yet, but it's supposed to be very interesting. They're diving into the timeline of the pharaohs, so yeah, I'd like to read that later on. Lastly, he also wrote Wie alt ist das Menschengeschlecht? And he wrote that in 1991, and he wrote it along with Christoph Marx. Very interesting books, very interesting topics. All of these books, he wrote more books, but all of these books, they are about time chronology. However, he didn't finish his last book that is about the time chronology in the first century of the first millennium. And that is what we're going to talk about today, because he left a lot of presentations, so we have a lot of stuff to get into. All right, so let's have a look. We start off with a traditional timeline. Here you can see a traditional timeline. I like these kind of maps. They're always so nice to give me a kind of helicopter view, to give me a perspective. All right, what is it that we're looking upon? And this is a very interesting way of seeing the world. So you can see all of the different civilizations, and you can see that they kind of end up into the modern age. Now, on top you can see the timeline: 3000 BC, 2000 BC, 1000 BC, 0 basically, 1000 AD, and 2000 AD. Now, beware, this map is already dated. There's lots of stuff that is not in there. However, as we're moving on with current discussions, I think it's a very good basis to start from, because a lot of mainstream academia still follow this kind of pattern. This is still what academia are learning when they're being taught by the current paradigm. So it's a good basis to start on. Let's have a zoom in, because this is the area that we want to focus upon. Now, maybe you can get a little bit more clarity now about what this map is about. We can see the Roman Empire, we can see the Byzantine Empire, we can see the Holy Roman Empire falling out of that, the Greeks before the Romans. So right away we have a big chunk of classical antiquity right here. And Mr. Heinsohn, this is where he sees that there is 700 years of missing timeline. So we're gonna dive into that. First, let's look at the three different times that are very important for the understanding of this. So there's 230 AD, there's 520 AD, and there's 930 AD. And all of these time segments, they all seem to align with each other. So if that doesn't make sense to you right now, we're gonna try to clarify that later on a little bit more for you. But let's start first with the 930 AD, and we're gonna dive into the archaeology section. Let's look right here, this area. So this is the area that represents Northern Europe. And so in Northern Europe, we have, of course, at this time, we have the Vikings. And this guy, which is Dagfinn Skre, he wrote in 2012 about the introduction of Christianity with the Vikings. So let's have a read. In the Scandinavian lands, the old rural places of power, commonly called central places, all met their end. A general conversion of Christianity took place at this time. All right, so that's very clear. At this time, 930 AD, this is when all the Vikings turned Christian. Then we can see where he's located right away. We can see he's located outside of the outskirts of the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. All right, next up, we have a mistake there. Forget about the fact that it says Hungarian migration. We're gonna get into that later on. I'm still working with the software. So what I really want to show you is this. This guy is Andrzej Buko, and in 2011 he wrote, "In Poland, there was a rapid, sometimes catastrophic collapse of many of the pre-existing tribal centers. These events were accompanied by the permanent or temporary depopulation of former areas of settlement." And so he writes this in 2011 in his book that he published. It's very important to understand, because we have seen the Vikings have their impact. Now we're seeing in Poland having an impact with a depopulation as well. And then you can see they line up, and then we're going to dive into Bulgaria. In Bulgaria's metropolis, Pliska, the whole production area was covered by considerable amounts of erosion material, written by Joachim Henning in 2007. His student as well, who is Shavdar Kriklov, in 2007 writes, "In the 11th century, the Pliska basin was turned into a desert landscape." It almost points towards some kind of cataclysm happening in the 11th century right here. So you can see these three different civilizations, they appear to have the same collapse at the same period in time. Now, let's dive into 420 AD. What happens in the Byzantine Empire? There's the Justinian plague, and Procopius of Caesarea at 550 AD, he writes, a considerable portion of the population of Constantinople died, and many of those who remained were so severely weakened by the disease that they could not work. As a result, all kinds of work came to a halt, and the economic activity of the empire was severely disrupted. The result was that the empire, which had been prosperous before the plague, fell into a condition of great poverty and distress. All right, so a plague, very interesting at the 530 AD mark. Now, hold on, we'll have another plague, and this plague is the Cyprian plague, and it's written by Eusebius of Caesarea, and he writes the following. And when the other abandoned the sick and died, the Christians, motivated by love, risked their own lives, tending to those stricken with the disease. They cared for the bodies of the dead and made sure that they were properly buried. In fact, Christians even gave their lives in effort to save others, believing that in this way they could show the most honorable and God-pleasing way of living. So here again, the rise of the Christian. So very interesting. We have a rise of Christians and we have a decline in pagans. Interesting correlations. All right, next up. We're starting filling in a lot of these things that happened at these specific timeline markers. Next up we have the invasions into the Friuli, which is in northern Italy. So this is right before the 230 mark, but it has a very interesting correlation. So we have the Xiongnu, which are typically considered that they are the Huns. From the Asian steppes. There's also the Yazyges, which are the Samaritans from Pannonia, which is Hungary, and they are often considered to be people that are related to the Scythian kind of tribes. And then we have the Quadi, which is considered a Germanic tribe, and they came from the upper Danube. And they all entered into the Roman Empire. There was this massive herd of pagan people trying to go into the Roman Empire, and the Romans, they talk about this. This is not disputed at all. But then we also have this area, and you can see it already in the map. And so the person who made the map, they also knew about this, because here we also have invasions. We have invasions at the same area, Friuli, northern Italy, and here is where the Huns enter from Pannonia. And this is considered Attila the Hun's invasions, which happens at the 451 mark AD. So not very close from 530 AD, also a little bit before it. We have the Gothics, which are considered the Ostrogoths. They are considered to come from north of the Black Sea, which is Ukraine. And then we have the Vandals from Scandinavia. They're supposed to come from Scandinavia, the Vandals. So I don't know if you ever heard from the Vandals, but yeah, it's where we get the word Vandal from, because they vandalized everything. And one of our favorite sponsors of this show, they've been with us from the beginning, so I really like promoting their products because I really think they're quality products. Organicacbd.com. If you need any CBD that you can use to help suppress some pain or some injuries or anything like that, if you've gone through any kind of illnesses or anything where you need some pain relief, try the CBD oil. It can never hurt. It's healthy for you. It's definitely effective. And we also had some people on the show who have actually ordered it, and they're very happy with the quality. So if you ordered some and you're really liking the quality, so please leave a comment down below and let us know if you're happy and satisfied with it. I use it myself. I use it for my dog. She has some little bumps on her back, you know, some elderly bumps and all of these things. And of course, we don't want to have any of that become any more malignant or anything like that. And so I give her CBD oil, and she's a happy camper. She's always with us, and I hope she will be with us for a long time. And if she will be, she will definitely be because of organicacbd.com. Go to the website, don't forget the dash, it's organica-cbd.com. Use the code Paradigm Shift because that is where you get your 5% discount, and that is also when you're supporting the show. So if you want to help support a local mom and pop store, and you want to help support the show, and you also want to support yourself, you need this in your medicine cabinet. So go to organicacbd.com, use the code Paradigm Shift, and then we'll continue back with a regular episode. You see the orange line, you see the blue line on the other side. Well, that is where the Roman Empire ends. So right away, this comes at the ending of the Roman Empire. Next up, we're gonna go a little bit more into time, and here we are again with the Hungarian migration, and there was also another invasion. So the Hungarian migration, it happens at 895, so also a little bit before the 930 mark. And now the Hungarians, they're considered the Magyar from Pannonia. So I'm not making this up, this is all history. And then we have the Viking raids from Scandinavia. So could it be that the Vandals might be the Vikings actually? So a lot of Viking raids happening back then. So right away we can see the three different migrations of the barbaric people into the same area of northern Italy. All right, next up, to understand this, I already told you that on the left we have the orange field, which is a huge Roman Empire, and then after the collapse it turns into the Byzantine Empire, and you can see in time it's almost an exact clear cut of when the Roman Empire ends and when the Byzantine Empire starts. Now that's not very normal in a civilization, right? Normally they just meander out, especially if it's such a huge civilization. But the interesting thing is that this doesn't only happen on a map of a time scale, it also happens on the actual map. So we can see almost the exact divergence of the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire in a geographical map. So we have Rome and we have Constantinople, which are the respective areas of the capitals of the empires. So let's look at Rome. So in Rome we see a massive urban destruction at 230 AD, which often coincides with the barbarians. People think, oh, it was the barbarians who destroyed the city. I mean, it could be an interesting theory. Could also be that there's something else going on here. Because what's very interesting is that when the Roman Empire falls, we have no trace at all when the Eastern Empire takes over at the 520 mark. However, in Constantinople, it appears that we have almost the exact opposite. It appears that there is no antique urbanism at the 230 mark. However, that doesn't take into account the first picture that I showed you in this presentation. If you're in Istanbul and you're able to reach that place, then please let me know, because I'd love to figure out what that column is. I'd love to have more pictures of that, because we need to do more research. However, according to Gunnar, there is no original Roman urbanism below the Byzantine Empire. However, at the 520 mark, there is evidence of a destruction because there is a big tsunami, and the tsunami brings big deposits of earth and slip and soil. So very interesting, it's almost like they're cross-sided. All right, next up, what is very interesting is if we look at these two areas of Europe, it appears that there's a big part missing, and so we have another map that can illustrate a little bit what's going on here. And what we have here is a map of Viking raids, Viking destructions, Scandinavian destructions, raids and all of that. And right away we can see a very interesting orange blob of the 10th century, because it almost appears that the Vikings came in and they destroyed everything before them. And yeah, the green parts are also considered to be raided very frequently by Vikings. Why? Because, well, destruction is found. So that is why we added this map. So we can see we have now the 3 different areas that all intermittently have their own kinds of destruction at their own kind of respective times. And this is now where Dr. Heinsohn makes a leap. This is where he says, well, if we can add all of these things up together at these different times, at the 230 AD mark, at the 520 AD mark, and at the 930 AD mark, we should be able to see that there's raids of barbarians at all marks. We can see that there's a global plague at the first 2 marks, and we don't have any evidence for one at the 930 marks. However, we see a lot of death at the 930 mark. And then we can see deposits of cataclysmic sediment at all 3 areas. Now, one explanation for this could be a volcanic winter, which is not disputed at all. It happened around the 520 AD mark, actually to be precise, 536. And it was responsible for the Byzantine collapse. And at the same time, it also was responsible for hurting the Persian Empire, the Arabian Empire, and also the Chinese Empire. All of them were impacted by this volcanic winter. There were dark days, the crops didn't grow. All of these things impacted all civilizations very significantly. Now, if we look at these other 2 marks, we also have the Roman collapse at the 230 mark, and we have a Mayan collapse at the 930 mark. So could it be that this is not 3 cataclysms? Could it be that all of this coincides to one big cataclysm, which means that if this is true, we have a time gap of 700 years in which all of these layers we can stack on top of each other instead of next to each other. So very interesting theory. Now, this is only a theory if you don't come up with any evidence. However, Professor Heinsohn has evidence. So let's have a look at that, shall we? So we're going to look into the archaeology and the architecture. First, we're going to dive a little bit into the archaeology. And so what happens is we have millefiori glass. And millefiori glass means that you have different types of colored glass that you all put together into one artifact, and you create kind of like this ornamental kind of mosaic picture, which the Romans really like. They like to have their mosaics. Let's see what we have at the Roman era. So we have the Roman era, 1st century AD. We have these beads. Very beautifully done. But then again, at Moseberg in Hungary, we have the same type of beads, and we have them at the 9th century. Also, Truso, Poland, which is considered to be Viking era, they also had the same kind of beads. All right. Next, we have bowls. Now, this Roman era bowl from the 1st century, it is very, very, very similar to this Islamic bowl, which is supposed to be 8th or 9th century. There's much more evidence like this, but I just put the most compelling evidence, all of this together. Now, there's also shards. There's this Roman shard of the 1st century AD, and this is Haithabu in Germany, which is 8th or 9th century. Now, what most people who will look at this, they will say, well, they are now heirlooms. So they are heirlooms from 700 years before, and these people, they gave them to the children and their grandchildren and all of that for 700 years, and that's how they kept them. Now, I don't know how long the cookware at your house lasts, but I am not keeping my plate for 700 years to last. The beads, maybe, But a bowl, I don't see that happening. Not in my household. I don't know how yours is, but it's not very probable that these are heirlooms. Also because in these places, these Hungary places in Poland, in these Viking settlements, there are no strata beneath them that have Roman layers. So that's very interesting. So where did their ancestors live that gave their grandchildren these heirlooms? They had heirlooms apparently, but they had no houses. Could it be that we're just looking at a gap of 700 years? Well, let's consider the following. So there's, for instance, these glass trails that you find on this Roman vase that is found in Cologne, Germany. Now it's very intricately, beautifully done. And then we find this shard of a plate, and that's found in Iraq. And it's either 9th or 10th century AD. So that is almost a 1,000-year difference. Looks very similar for a 1,000-year difference if you ask me. All right, next up, ship construction. So we have war galleys of the Romans, and they look like this. Now this is based on actual reconstructions of the ones that we found in the ground, because boats that sink and they stay conserved in water, they actually preserve quite well. So we can make a fairly good reconstruction of what an actual Roman war vessel was made out of. And what you can see at both of these ships, they both have a square sail. Not only are the ships similar, but the sail rigging is also the same. And we can see this not only at war vessels, we also see this at trading vessels. There's a freight ship, which is found in London in the UK. It's definitely from the Roman era. And then on the right, we can see a Viking ship reconstruction, which is found in Denmark, which is interesting, because if the Romans were able to sail to England with this ship, and the Vikings were able to sail from this ship from Denmark to other places, then how come the Romans with the same ships were not able to sail to Scandinavia? They never conquered Scandinavia. They didn't even land on shore according to our history. I don't know. What do you think? Next up, we're going to dive into these Roman basilicas. And the picture that you see on the left is a pagan basilica, and it's called Ulpia, and it's from the 1st century AD. The one on the right, that's a Christian basilica, and it's the St. Peter, and it's from the 4th century AD. So there's not much evolution in architecture happening here in these 300 years. I mean, it's basically still the same building. There's no adjustments. There's no new things added. Looks very interesting to me. And next up, we have the Roman theaters. The Romans did not only have amphitheaters, such as the Colosseum, and they had them all over the Roman Empire. They also had theaters. And in these theaters, they would perform plays and stuff, so you can get your propaganda out there and you can perform it to the audience, and the audience will be influenced by your ideas and they will start to think in the way that you want to think. Now, that's what you need a theater for, which is basically it's half of a Colosseum and the other half is a podium. Now, let's look at all the podiums. I highlighted them here for you. And particularly interesting is the evolution of these theaters. So you can see a little bit of a change in all of these things, but you can also see the similarities of them. So in the middle of these theaters, you can see a big door opening. But then on the left and on the right, the big door is flanked by two other doors. And these two side doors, they appear to be in pillars of multiple levels of construction. Interesting that you put the left and the right door into a pillar. Now, in the beginning, they were flanked perhaps by Roman pillars, but eventually they turn out to be more of a building size. And what is also interesting is above the front door, you have this little window, which is like a little gap. So interesting that you have a theater backdrop that is already multi-stories. I mean, clearly the Romans had a nose for theater. And it all comes from the 1st century BC till the 2nd century AD. So let's have a closer look at these beautiful theaters, and we can see all of the similarities among them. And if this kind of architecture looks in a strange way kind of similar to you, it might be because of this. These Gothic churches, basically, they follow the same principles. They have a big door in the center, they have two doors on the side. These two doors in the side are in big pillars above the front door. There's a big window, and there's all kinds of different varieties among these all across Europe. So for instance, the very famous one, Notre Dame in Paris, but then also for instance the Nidaros Church in Trondheim, Norway, been there myself, Salisbury Church in the UK, in England, but they're scattered all over Europe. They're all the way from Eastern Europe all the way to the Iberian Peninsula. All of these churches followed the same architecture. Another partner that we're really happy to be affiliated with is blueearthinnovations.com. They have fantastic products. I mean, if you haven't seen our episode yet with Frank Colaris and what fantastic products he makes this fantastic water that he calls Elixir, which it has two of the most strongest vibrations encoded in it. It has the message of love and gratitude in it. And with that, he can clean up all of the water. Now, this is not any type of fiction. This is actually real. I have a water vitalizer, and with that, if you can stream your water through this for 18 hours, it will actually be purified. It does not require filters. It does not eat electricity. It is just a concept that works, and it works with the natural flow of life. And so if you want to vitalize your water, if you want to upgrade the energy of your water, you need one of these in your life. And if you cannot afford this, I have a friend of mine who says, well, I already have a water purifier, so I wouldn't need this. Well, you might have that, but is your water actually structured? Well, that is where the eggs come into play. So he has these little eggs, he fills them with this water, he puts them in a epoxy resin, which is beautiful. It's a really nice product, and these are only 28 euros a piece, I think. You can order them at blueearthinnovations.com. You can just put them in your water filter, or if you actually want to buy one of these has 4 of these eggs already inside of them. So if you need any of these products in your life, and I seriously recommend that you do, go to blueearthinnovations.com, use the code ParadigmShift, you get a 5% discount. Not only that, you're helping support us this show, you get the best structured water that you can get out there, you get the cleanest water. So I seriously recommend that you need those Blue Earth Innovation products in your life. So please go check them out at the web shop, use the code ParadigmShift, and we'll continue back to this episode. Well, there's some of you who might say, well, those buildings, they were built by secret orders who had secret masonry ideas, and they were taught to build in this kind of skills. And all of these secret orders, they had to hide and they had to work in the shadows because these churches, they were condemning them. Okay, I'm willing to consider that, even though the churches obviously ordered them to build in this style. I'm willing to consider it, but think of this. If you're a secret order and you're starting off at the 1st century AD and you have to make it all the way to the 9th century AD, that's 800 years of secrecy. Now imagine how many generations are there in 800 years. So for 800 years, you have to keep this building style a secret until you finally can implement it again for the people who are suppressing you. I don't know, doesn't sound very logical to me. All right, next up. This is a Excedra forum, and the one on the left is one that is found in Cologne at the 2nd century AD, so it's definitely Roman. And the one on the right, that is the Ingelheim Palace, which is also found in Germany. Now, Ingelheim was very famous because it was the palace of Charlemagne, also called Charles the Great, and he lived in 9th century AD. Now, what is very interesting, is that the interior is also very Roman. So these are some notes that are from the construction workers who dug up this palace. For instance, they're saying the semicircular building clearly shows the significance of antique models, the only one of its kind in medieval architecture. Ingelheim's throne hall is in the tradition of the antique and late antique palatial aula. Ingelheim's water tunnel with hydraulic mortar impressively confirms Roman engineering. The aula roof was covered with tiles formed in the ancient Roman way, and then there's also paint found that has the same chemistry as Roman paint. So it all appears to be very Roman for someone that is a medieval king, which is Charlemagne. Now, who was Charlemagne? Well, Charlemagne, he revived the title of Roman Empire, which by that he became the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He had 46 years of reign, and in 44 of those years he was at war. He made many reforms on which, amongst others, he did numerous legal reforms, he had educational reforms, he had economic and agricultural reforms, and he was a patron of architecture, and he did all of this at the same time that he was fighting a war. Now you might think, how is it possible that one man can do so much in so little time? Well, it might not be that he did all of those things. It might just be that things were attributed to him. And why would I think that? Well, because now we're entering the political domain. Can you imagine that the political domain would fake the news? Can you imagine that they would add stuff that is not there and that they would remove stuff that is inconvenient for them? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. If all of this is true, then what happened with the text that came from the Roman century all the way up to the 9th century AD? Well, there's this guy called John Wilson Ross. He lived from 1818 till 1887, and he wrote a couple of books, amongst others Tacticus and Braccolini and the Annals forged in the 15th century. He had the following hypothesis. He thought that there was forgery as a deliberate Renaissance operation. Now, why did he think that? Because there was a group called the Renaissance book hunters. And for instance, there's this guy who was Poggio Braccolini, and in his book, Ross claims that Braccolini forged the annal of Tacticus. Not all of them, just a specific one, because it would be nice to pick your author and then write something and say, this is made by so-and-so, or this is made by so-and-so, and he writes this or he writes that. And so Ross claims that this doesn't happen just with one person, it happens with multiple people. And so then what you get if you do this for a long time, you get intertextuality. So that means that all the forgeries grip into each other. And so that might mean that a whole bunch of things that we consider history is actually not history at all. Now, where did these books come from? They were found in unlikely places in highly convenient circumstances. So, for instance, a very dark dungeon that would often be wet and there would be moist, and you wouldn't be able to find a book there with parchment that would still be readable. I mean, all of the things that would live there, they would have eaten the paper already. And also to Ross, it seemed that all of the discoveries, they seemed to align perfectly well with all of the ideas of the humanists who would actually want to have these ideas written by these antique writers. So what would be the reason why you would want to do something like that? Well, the Medici family, they would pay handsomely for all of these scholars to come with rediscovered work. So there would be high payment for such a book. Now, Braccolini, for instance, he would be working for Cosimo, one of the patriarchs of the Medici family. But could it be that the Medici family would have a different alternative for having all of these texts? Could it be that the Medici family would actually be paying these authors to write them. So ask yourself the following. Could it be that they have paid them to alter history for political and ideological reasons? Again, I ask you the question, where do you think that politicians get their power from? Alright, so far up, I thank you very much for watching. This was a pleasure to get this episode out of you. I love this kind of stuff. I hope you guys like it too. If you did like it, please do all the things that help out the channel. Please do the thumbs up. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us out a lot. And we want to get over that 1,000 subscribers threshold where we can finally gain some income so we can make more of this stuff for you guys. Also, the way that you can support us is by ordering some of our products from our sponsors, organica-cbd.com. For the best quality CBD products out there. We're partnered with them because they are going for quality and not for profit. Use the code Paradigm Shift. And if you want to structure your water and you want to raise the bovine values of your water, then what you need is you need to go to blueearthinnovations.com and order some of their fantastic products, some of their eggs, some of their water, some of their vitalizers to get all of the pollutants out of your water. Now they might be a little bit costly in the beginning, but there's no additional filters needed. And also you can use the code Paradigm Shift so you get that discount. And also we have a Patreon channel. If you want to support us on a monthly basis, then I recommend you go to patreon.com/paradigm shift for you, and you can see all the episodes without any additional advertisements.